Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Marche, the webinar director here at Advice Chaser, and I want to welcome you. Before we introduce our guest and get started, I do need to do a bit of legal housekeeping. Advice Chaser, the host of this webinar, is not a registered investment advisor. We cannot and do not give financial advice. Today's presentation is for educational purposes only and cannot be considered advice for any person's individual situation. Advice Chaser regularly hosts informative webinars, such as this one, featuring a variety of knowledgeable professionals, many of whom are licensed advisors. Any opinions, ideas, jokes, or principles expressed by presenters are their own, and however true, funny, or interesting, are not endorsed by Advice Chaser. Please do not act on the information you hear today without consulting a qualified financial professional. Well, we are thrilled to bring you this educational presentation today. Attendees are muted, but we do encourage you to ask questions using the chat box, and the presenter will answer those queries during or after the webinar today as appropriate. If you ask a question in the chat box, go ahead and leave your phone number as well. If we can't get to your question during the webinar today, we'll make sure that someone reaches out to you after today's event. We want this experience to be as educational as possible. So again, please don't hesitate to ask for clarification or expansion of the material. Well, I'd love to introduce you to our presenter today. Leo Wong is a fiduciary financial planner with Grant Vest Financial Group, specializing in new client acquisition and market research. Leo, the youngest of three boys, was born in Malaysia and immigrated to the United States at a young age. Leo and his family went on to successfully own and operate several restaurants throughout central New Jersey. Leo graduated from Christian Brothers Academy and Monmouth University with a BS in finance and currently resides in Monmouth County, New Jersey. About his reasons for becoming a financial advisor, Leo says, "My passion for becoming a financial advisor stemmed from the seeds my parents planted when they came to America in the early 90s. As restaurant entrepreneurs, my parents worked 72 hours per week to provide food and shelter for the family for over a decade. And as grateful as I was for my parents instilling a work ethic upon my siblings and I, they never developed a retirement nest egg for themselves. And as a first-generation immigrant, I can relate to those who work hard to provide for their family but lack the knowledge or insight to plan for retirement. And that's what brings me a sense of fulfillment when I'm able to help families plan for the future." Well, Leo, we're so glad to have you back. I know that we have talked a lot about the complexities of retirement and planning for federal employees. And I know this is one that you've worked hard to hopefully make easy to understand. So I'm really excited to have you present again, and I'm going to turn the time over to you. I will say one thing before we get started. We are recording this in November 2022. So if you see this on a recording, just know that the dates that we're referencing are that's what the day we're recording. So if there's anything that we're saying 2 months from now or this year, that's what that refers to. Okay, go ahead, Leo.
All right. Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, and I'm happy to be back to help kind of debunk the some of the truths and the myths of cola and some things that apply and some things that don't. But as a financial planner, these are things that I come across very often, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to discuss this at this current time because it's the hot topic now about COLA, about inflation and how it affects your retirement, especially for the federal employees. And there's a lot of puzzle pieces here, so to speak. And hopefully I can kind of put it together and show you a clear picture, therefore empowering you to make the right decisions moving forward as well. But for today's agenda, I'm going to go over some very basic stuff first, which is what is COLA? How does it affect you? how do they even calculate COLA. And for some of you that may or may not be eligible for it, I'm going to go through some examples and more importantly, how does COLA affect your retirement planning? And these are things that I think will be insightful, and hopefully it will give you some guidance as you move forward on whether you're on the cusp of retiring or you are already retired and you're just concerned about keeping your buying power. So let's start off with a basic question, and that is, what is COLA, right? So COLA stands for cost of living adjustment. It is just a way for you to upkeep your purchasing power. As some of you may notice, but more recently, this past year, inflation has been the hot topic on all the headline news because it's a natural thing that happens to us as costs of goods and services naturally just increase, right? You think about what things cost, 30 years ago to today, and you'll notice a stark difference. However, from a year-to-year standpoint, you probably won't notice it as much, of course, until this year, where everyone gets hit very hard and notices it everywhere, from housing to gas to food prices. But for today, I'm only going to be talking primarily about three types of COLA, and the COLAs that affect current federal employees, so the ones that are still working, the federal retirees, the ones that are no longer working, and then of course the ones that are collecting Social Security or will be collecting, and how to go about that and how it affects you. But for COLA, it's normally announced in October of each year. So you probably heard the headline news last month about COLA and the new ones that are released for 2023. But it typically takes into effect in December, but doesn't reflect in your payments until January. So what is CPI and how does it affect your COLA? Now, CPI is Consumer Price Index. All right, very simple. It's essentially a form of inflation indicator. It shows us how has prices risen from a year-to-year standpoint. And because of CPI reports, that will also help us dictate a direct correlation with what type of COLAs will be going up. Think about it like this. It's the concept of a dollar today is not the same dollar tomorrow, right? Especially if you are someone that is sitting in cash or has savings account and you're not receiving a return on your money. Simply by just not having a return on your money on an annual basis, you're actually losing buying power due to inflation, right? So for example, if you had $100 in your savings account at the beginning of this year, well, at the end of this year, with inflation clocking at the 8% range, that same $100 at the end of this year will only be able to afford you to buy $92 worth of goods and services. And that is how inflation works and why we have implemented COLAs for our economy, for our income earners or people on fixed incomes, is to combat that. So this way their buying power isn't eroded. Last thing to say about that is that inflation is kind of like the carbon monoxide of financial planning. You can't see it, you can't touch it, you can't smell it, but eventually, if it stays long enough, it will definitely kill you, right? So be wary of that because that is one of the things that people just aren't aware of. And that's why being able to get a return on your money, even at a very small pace, is what is necessary to keep that buying power.
It's a very potent analogy there. Definitely going to remember that.
Oh, I like that pun too.
Yeah.
Very good. It is a very potent analogy. So let's talk about how is COLA calculated then. So COLA is calculated based on consumer price index for what's called urban wage earners and clerical workers, right? So so that is the proper terminology for it. And you could get all this off of the government website on how they make these type of how they come up with these type of numbers. However, last year, in which COLA became effective, was 2021. Uh, Therefore, the law that we requires that we use the average CPI number from the previous year, which is third quarter of 2021, uh, that came in at a base of 268.421. And then they take that number and they compare it with the third quarter of 2022, which is this year, of CPI number, which came out to 291.901. And because this number, the difference between the two numbers exceeds last year's number by 8.7%, the COLA that will become effective starting next month will be at 8.7%. And of course, I showed you a little formula at the bottom as well on how they came about that number, right?
I have a question about this number here, about that CPI number, where it says the base average was 268.421. What is that number? Is it a dollar amount? What is that exactly?
Yeah, it's not necessarily a dollar amount. It's just a number that they assign to each category, whether that category is the housing category, whether it's a transportation category, or even food and beverages category. But there's a number assigned to it that allows them to put a tangible number. And of course, they take the averages of, I'm sorry, not the average, but the computation of all those numbers. And that's how they came up with a base average.
All right, so that makes a little more sense, but this affects how COLA is calculated.
That is correct. So let's talk about the eligibility for COLA then. So there's three types here that I want to outline for you. And the three types are for people that are still working. Now, for those people, you do get a COLA. And President Biden sent a letter outlining an alternative pay plan for current federal employees to get a raise for next year of 4.6%, right? Now, that will be finalized next month. So we'll have a more definitive answer then, and it will reflect starting January of the following year in 2023. So all the people that are still working that are federal employees, you can anticipate around that range for a pay raise. For current federal retirees, so for people that are already retired, your calculation is a little different and it's more automatic. And for you, it's the 8.7% COLA, which we went over in previous slides. This is one of the highest we have ever seen since 1981, when inflation at that point back then was the Volcker era, as we call it, were in the 10% range. So this is one of the biggest ones in the past 40 years. However, I do want to make a clarifying point here that not all federal retirees will receive that COLA for 2023. And the reason why I bring that up is for anyone that are normal FERS retirees, your COLA starts at 62. So that means if you have what's called a qualified retirement before the age of 62, in other words, MRA plus 30, you actually don't get that COLA. You will only get that COLA if you're over the age of 62, okay? Now, for the LEO provisions, which are law enforcement officers, and these are spanning from people in the IRS, which are gun carrying, to Customs and Border Protection, to nuclear weapons couriers, or even ICE agents. Your COLA will be applied as early as age 50. So for those type of people in that category, your COLAs will be kicking in for that. Now, I also want to outline that you don't want to retire just for COLA. And one of the slides that you'll see in the upcoming slides, will outline that that COLA only applies for folks that are the full COLA, anyways, are applied for folks that are retired for a full calendar year. Although there are proration factors, which I'll cover next and show you what that looks like. But the last thing I want to also point out is there are also a difference between pay raises. Now, pay raises are for current federal employees that are eligible for a step increase every 1 to 3 years for having sufficient sufficient accreditations for working their job at a sufficient manner, right? So that is different from COLA and of course different from federal employees. The little graph on the bottom that I have outlined there will show you that the first COLA that will be implemented on your paycheck is actually a little different from the 8.7 that they outline. And this is for the retirees specifically. If their CPI report, which came out to be 8.7, is greater than 3%, thank you, Marche, that means when they calculate your first COLA, they take that CPI number of 8.7% and subtract 1%. So what will be actually implemented and as an increase is was it 7.7% then? And I think on one of the following slides, Marche, if you move forward, we'll be able to see that as well. But before we dive into that, let me talk. Oh, there it is. So how it affects your retirement, right? So if you look at this chart here, you'll see that COLA isn't as straightforward when it comes to applying towards your pension in retirement. So to get the full COLA for your FERS pension, a retiree must have been in receipt of the payment for a full year. So what do I mean by that? For you to get the full COLA of 7.7% for the FERS pension, you must have been retired by December 2021. In other words, you have to be retired for a full year before you get the full COLA. If you were to retire the months following that date, there is a reduction or prorated version of it by 1/12 of the increase for each month a retiree has been receiving benefits. So for the folks that are actually going to be retiring December of 2022, that means for the COLA of 7.7%, it does not apply to you. You will not get any of that COLA in 2023. However, in 2024, you will get the full COLA if there is one at that point. This is a very contrast different rule from Social Security. In order to get your full Social Security COLA, which is the third item that you'll get as a retiree, is that as long as you are retired by December 2022, which is next month, you will get the full COLA for Social Security starting in January of 2023. So if you are eligible for Social Security, one of the strategies that we have been advising all our clients is to make sure that if they're going to be collecting it next year anyways, turning it on at the end of this year financially makes the most sense. Okay, so very different, a big contrast difference between a FERS COLA for your pension versus getting a COLA for your Social Security. Different rules, and it will affect different payments as well. So I understand that talking about it is one thing, but giving examples would be a great way to really drive it home. So I have set up 2 examples for you to kind of put it all together. But we're going to start off with Bob here. Bob has retired as a federal employee on September 24th of this year, starting at age 62. His first pension will begin October of 2022, which is $3,000. And it just so happens that later in that month, he finds out that the CPI report, inflation is up 8.7%. Therefore, in order to calculate his first COLA, he would take the 8.7% subtracted by 1%, which means that he's eligible for a 7.7% increase in his first pension. However, because Bob retired in September of 2022 and his payment started in October, that means he is prorated for 2 qualified months, October and November, of that 7.7% increase. Therefore, he's actually going to get a 1.3% prorated COLA starting in January of 2023. Therefore, his new pension in January will be $3,039 on a monthly basis. However, this is different from his Social Security because Bob also turned on his Social Security. As long as he turned it on by December 2022, we'll get that 8.7% increase in his Social Security starting January 23. So that's Bob. Let's talk about Sally now. Now, Sally also retired in 2022. However, she retired in January at age 65. And her pension starts in February of 2022 of $3,000. Later that year, she finds out that the CPI reports came out 8.7. Therefore, for FERS COLA will be eligible to receive a 7.7% increase for next year. But because Sally started collecting her pension in February, that means she is only getting a pro rata basis of 10 out of the 12 months. Therefore, if you do the 10 divided by 12, multiplied by 7.7%, that will give you a 6.4% COLA for Sally, meaning January 2023, her new pension will be $31.92 per month. And of course, same thing with Sally. She turned on her Social Security in 2022. Therefore, her January 2023 Social Security payments will go up by 8.7 for that benefit. So as you see here, the examples are great to kind of drive home the points. However, because there's so many other provisions and certain situations that everyone goes through, we always highly recommend speaking with your financial planner to discuss the optimal strategy depending on your life strategy. But making these type of decisions can equate to quite a big dollar sign in your pension payments as well as Social Security. So I highly encourage you to make sure you get all the right knowledge that you need, and of course execute the strategy because it will pay quite a bit of difference in what you receive ongoing for the rest of your life. And with that, I'll put it back to Marche.
All right, we do have a couple questions before we end today, and then I will tell attendees if you have any more questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. One of the questions is, isn't this already done for you as far as the calculations? Why would you want to calculate that when it's already going to appear in your pension check?
Very good. So you are correct that it's automatically going to be calculated for you. However, you are the one that needs to make the decision on when you retire and when you turn on your Social Security. The government will not do that for you. So that is where the power and the education comes into play, is being able to have the knowledge and the power to make those execution to help you maximize your first pension as well as your Social Security.
All right, another question about the CPI. So is there a CPI and COLA adjustment based on that CPI every single year?
Yes, every single year there is a calculation. However, COLAs are not always given every single year. So there are years where there is no COLA because the CPI numbers came relatively flat or just off by a little bit. Therefore, you will not get any COLAs. This is a particularly unique year because this is the highest CPI report and highest COLA we've seen since 1981. Therefore, this was an excellent talking point because we don't come across this very often. Last time this would have been relevant was 4 decades ago. So I wanted to make sure that people are aware of this to take advantage of some of the unique situations that we have for going into next year.
All right, very good. We did have one final question that I'm going to answer, and the question is, will this recording be available to watch afterwards? Yes, we will be sending a link to the replay of this event, and that will be in your email. So look for that. We'll also post it on advicechaser.com as well under the recorded webinars. Another question came in. So with the COLA decreasing based on the months of eligibility, would we see a COLA increase as inflation remains during the new months of payments?
Good question on that. And it doesn't get calculated on a monthly basis for COLA. They only will release the report once a year in October. So the next time we'll see a potential COLA for the following year, which is 2024, will be in October of 2023. And the same rules apply on your FERS COLA. So we'll redo the same math again and be able to apply it on a pro rata basis. But I think the biggest takeaway from this person asking the question is that you don't want to retire just simply because you saw a high COLA number, because it might not be applicable for you on your, starting in the new year.
All right, and then one more question. So the question is, this COLA is calculated nationally, is that correct? It's not based on your particular area where cost of living might be higher or lower?
Yeah, because this is a federal item that gets run and put together. This is only as a nation, not specific to regions.
All right, well, that's all the time we have today for questions, and I want to thank those of you who have asked the questions. And if we weren't able to get to it, again, leave your contact information in the chat, and we'll reach out to you to see if we can answer that. On behalf of Advice Chaser, we want to thank Leo for being here and for the organizations that have made this webinar possible today. And as I said before, look to your email for a link to the replay of this event, and you're welcome to share that replay with friends and family, coworkers, colleagues, anyone who you think might need this information. Here at Advice Chaser, we're all about helping you find a financial advisor who's a great fit for your life and your financial questions. Our matching service is free to you, and every one of our advisor partners has committed to offer a free initial consultation to anyone we introduce them to. Find out more by going to advicechaser.com and clicking on the link to find an advisor. Well, once again, from Advice Chaser, thank you so much for coming. We will see you at another webinar soon. Goodbye, everyone.